death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
John Carpenter's Halloween was released in the fall of 1978 and changed the face of horror.
Blank, pale emotions.
There was nothing like it. It just blew me away.
It certainly has become a classic.
Halloween ushered in modern horror.
You can sort of look at horror and it's before Halloween and then it's after Halloween.
Its success would make it the most profitable independent film of its time.
You know, Halloween's the movie everybody had to see.
Everybody who went to see that film got on the phone and told 3 other people, and those 3 told 6 other people. And within 3 or 4 days, it was huge.
The film captured the imagination of a generation.
This movie gives me the creeps.
It is really scary.
I remember getting goosebumps.
And gave its producers a chart-topping franchise as unstoppable as its central antagonist.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
This killer, masked, unknown, was a force of nature.
Michael Myers is purely and simply evil.
This isn't a man.
With a minuscule budget,
people would be running around inside moving lights because there weren't enough lights.
We created Fall with 3 trash bags full of painted leaves.
A group of unknown actors.
My agent called me up and said, you play some psycho, and Jamie Lee Curtis is in the movie. Well, who's Jamie Lee Curtis?
I was surprised I was cast, period.
And little hope of financial success.
The reviews came in, they were awful. As far as I knew, it was a complete bomb.
The movie would spawn scores of imitations, but not one equal.
Every scene is put together perfectly.
It is a magical movie.
It's an exercise in style.
There's something very beautiful about it.
The lighting, the mask.
The music is unbelievable.
This is the story of a group of Hollywood newcomers, working hard, having fun,
Help me, please!
and scaring the hell out of America.
Happy Halloween.
I saw the boogeyman. I saw him outside.
What do you look like?
The boogeyman.
With a thin storyline,
The thought of a babysitter being in jeopardy came to mind.
Every kid in America knows what a babysitter is.
a shoestring budget,
The pressures were tremendous. 20-some days of shooting.
and a director barely out of film school,
It happened in here and then you leave?
no one expected big things from John Carpenter's Halloween.
We're just a bunch of kids. We just wanted to make a movie.
Totally.
It's a horror B-flick, low-budget movie.
It didn't feel like a movie.
This is going to be the worst film ever made.
It's a horror flick with a guy with a mask. I mean, who's gonna watch that?
The short answer? Everyone.
I have never seen an audience react the way they did.
Saw people react, I went, oh my God, this actually may do pretty good.
They were running up and down the aisles and screaming and hollering.
It was very clear that what he had tried to do was working.
Moviegoers were haunted by the simple story of a neighborhood boy who went mad and killed his sister in the creepy house down the street,
You're not supposed to go up there. That's a spook house.
then escapes from captivity years later to pick up where he left off.
It seems absurd that at some time that seemed completely like a fresh idea, just this single killer with a knife.
Michael Myers is faceless, and he's psychotic.
He was a force, this horrible force blowing into town.
As Loomis says, he is purely and simply
evil. What do we do? He's been here once tonight. I think he'll come back.
You feel that you're watching something that could happen in any town in America, not just Halloween Town, so to speak.
Halloween is very, very effective at finding the horror in the ordinary.
Makes the senseless acts all the more horrifying.
And it makes home feel like an unsafe place.
I'm babysitting the Doyles. It's only 3 houses down. We can keep each other company. Oh, terrific.
And for the unknown killer's prey, a cast of ordinary, hormonally charged teenagers.
Paul dragged me into the boys' locker room.
Exploring uncharted territory.
Totally charged. Just talk.
A large portion of the movie takes place in daylight hours with these characters running around being teenagers.
The characterizations of the girls is one of the things I love about the original Halloween, is that the three of us are so different.
He had three choices for girls. You either have the quiet, repressed, really smart, good girl.
I forgot my chemistry book.
The cheerleader.
So who cares? I always forget my chemistry book and my math book and my English
Or the
book.
snarky, smart aleck girl.
Hey, jerk! Speed kills!
We're teenage girls, you know, having fun, kissing, making out, dying.
While the film's heroines remain in the dark about the killer tracking them,
I saw the boogeyman.
the children in their care are helplessly aware of the boogeyman in the shadows.
Nobody believes me.
I believe you, Tommy.
In this film, it's the little kid who's aware. And actually, it's funny, the only two people in the whole movie who know what's going on are Tommy and Loomis. And one's a little kid and one's a weirdo.
On the hunt to stop the evil is Michael Myers' psychiatrist, the brave but unhinged Dr. Loomis.
Every kid in Haddonfield thinks this place is haunted. They may be right.
He's this weird character. Michael Myers isn't just a patient for him. Michael Myers is a crusade.
You can either ignore it or you can help me to stop it.
It's really rare that you're going to find a psychiatrist whose mission in life is to shoot his patient.
You must think me a very sinister doctor.
Carpenter's mastery of the medium is evident from the film's opening sequence.
One of the longest and most intricate shots in film history.
To its thrilling finale.
You're sitting down and seeing a movie called Halloween about a masked killer. That guy's going to kill somebody eventually. By stretching it out, he makes the tension unbearable to the point where, as Michael Myers begins to get closer to these characters and sort of really intersect, he's watching on the edge, he's getting closer. When he finally gets in there, it's not just scary, it's this incredible tension relief.
We know what's coming and we're powerless to stop it.
It was a film so effective that its audience was too busy screaming to notice the near absence of on-screen blood.
If you watch the movie, you feel like you watched a bloodbath, but there's no blood.
Don't show it to them. Make them think they saw it. Don't give them blood and gore. Theater of the mind. That formula would work tomorrow.
Stuff we see we can conquer, but what we can't see really scares us.
Halloween became so successful, it's hard to believe that it was the result of inexperienced young filmmakers, many of whom were making their first film.
Here we were, this kind of guerrilla film unit.
It was about as lean and as mean as you could get.
Those days, kids making movies was rare.
Oh, I get $25 a week, and I get to walk around. It's right by my house. Okay, I'll do it.
It was my first real speaking part in a film.
Don't get dressed.
It was everybody's big chance, and so everybody was really rowing in the same direction to make it something big, something that would really, really be great.
Carpenter delivered a film that transcended its meager budget.
This low budget gave the film certain haunted looking empty screen because we couldn't afford extras. That added to the success of it.
You have a finite number of people, one principal set, and the people are killed off one by one. So, you know, it's a very economical way to cast a movie.
That same economy and efficiency is perhaps most evident in the movie's score, which added immeasurably to the film's effectiveness and became a classic on its own.
I mean, it's got to be one of the most top 5 most recognizable movie scores of all time.
That score, in a lot of ways, is the main character of the movie.
Come on, the music is unbelievable. Unbelievable that he did that by himself.
Totally creatively, John Carpenter is the one who really took care of it. And I think he gets all the credit for this franchise.
But before Halloween would shoot frame 1, Carpenter, in a move that would become the stuff of Hollywood legend, would put it all on the line with a handful of demands that could have derailed his career before it started.
I watched him for 15 years, sitting in a room, staring at a wall, not seeing the wall, looking past the wall, looking at this night, inhumanly patient.
Over the past 3 decades, John Carpenter's Halloween has become the gold standard of the slasher genre, a far cry from the B-movie it started as in 1978. But the seeds for the film were planted even earlier, in 1953, as 5-year-old John Carpenter sat in a darkened theater, scared out of his wits.
I think probably the film that influenced me the most was a film called It Came from Outer Space. It was in 3D of all things, back in 1953. I was a little tyke. And I had the glasses on, and it scared the pants off me. Terrified me. But I quickly realized, wait a minute, you know, I'm in this theater with my parents. And nothing's gonna happen to me here. This thing I just saw caused that feeling. That's pretty cool. I thought, man, that's what I want to do. I want to direct movies. That looks cool. I was stupid and young.
He was filmmaking when he was a mere lad. It was cool, and it was somebody who knew what they were doing and had some great dreams up ahead.
As a young adult, Carpenter enrolled in the prestigious USC Film School. He fancied himself a classical director in the mold of his cinematic idol, Howard Hawks, a studio director from Hollywood's golden age who carved out a name for himself by hopping genres, producing and directing a slew of classics.
And I was much more of an old Hollywood fan, so I kind of brought that with me and decided if I'm going to direct movies, I'm going to do it that way. Sort of as a throwback.
He didn't want to do something that just appealed to him on some narrow level. He wanted to make a film that a wide audience would enjoy.
You also said once that you'd like the clock to stop and you to go back to the 40s and
I would love to be a director during the 40s in a studio situation. I would have loved it, working on sound stages, having that kind of control, that kind of style.
Carpenter proved himself to be a shrewd businessman early on, raising $30,000 to expand his USC student thesis, Dark Star, into a feature film.
We had these guys out in space for 20 years, and there were no women, and they were bombing planets.
The sci-fi comedy didn't create much of a splash, but it did catch the attention of a group of independent film investors who agreed to back Carpenter's next film, an urban reimagining of Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. Made for $75,000, Assault on Precinct 13 impressed the film's distributor, Irwin Yablans, who was looking to move from distribution into film production.
I looked at it and I thought to myself, this is really a good movie. This is exciting, it's got energy. Well, that got me to thinking about how we could make a film with John Carpenter. I knew that this man had talent, and how could I use it? Horror films were my first thought, because horror films are bread and butter in that they are easy to make and easy to sell.
He said, why don't we make a low-budget movie about these babysitters? Because every girl in America can relate to babysitting. And we'll have some killer out there stalking them. And we'll call it the Babysitter Murders.
And I thought I'd have to do a sell on him. He was a USC film school graduate and all that. I thought he was going to think it was too crass.
I wanted to make Westerns. I didn't want to make this crap. Well, Westerns died off, so, you know, what are you going to do? Because I wanted to direct movies and I wanted to work, I said, sure, no problem.
And I told him the idea, and what do you think we can do a picture like this for? Because you got to shoot it. And he threw out the figure of $300,000. Well, I said, John, if you can do it for $300,000, I'll find a way to get the money.
Halloween was made for peanuts.
The budget was so small on the movie that they had to have the actors wearing their own clothes.
By 1982, a movie like E.T., which is considered a low-budget movie, is made for $10 million.
The young director had only 2 stipulations.
I get final cut, and I get my name above the title.
Both requests were unheard of for a novice filmmaker.
John Carpenter is a maverick. I always call him Hollywood's Dark Star.
And I love the balls on Carpenter. He had that cockiness, but he had the talent to back it up.
How dare I? Well, I was a film school student. I had studied a lot of film history and my favorite directors. I saw how they could brand themselves. I knew that it was a way to people remember me.
If you can do it for $300,000, I said, you can have anything you want.
Had it been done by a major studio on a big budget, I think it's fairly certain he wouldn't have had his name above the title.
Now I had to figure out how to get the $300,000.
Yablans began to pursue financing for their film. He set up a meeting with Mustafa Akkad, a colleague and sometime business partner who, as Yablans was aware, was on the lookout for projects to fund.
He said, I have a film and low budget, and he said $300,000. I was worried, 300. I mean, you get worried when the budget is low, and you get worried when the budget is high.
He couldn't even conceive that a movie could be made for $300,000. I knew it could be because I had been around that world.
I said, $300,000? He said, well, yeah. I said, what's the stories about? He said, it's about a babysitter to be killed by the boogeyman.
I said to John, John, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go in there and I'm going to arrange a meeting for you and Mustafa. I want you to call me from his office when you're sitting with him and just do that for me.
At Irwin's request, I met Mustafa. He said, why should I give you this movie? How do I know you're going to be able to pull this off? And I just simply said, you have to trust me.
When he spoke to me, he was speaking to me with images. He was editing in front of me, so I was very impressed.
They called me from his office, and I got on the phone. And I proceeded to shame Mustafa, who was a very proud man. And I literally said to Mustafa, I know it's a lot of money, and I know that you don't want to take the risk. And with John sitting across from him, I knew he wouldn't back down. And we got the $300,000.
With financing secured, Carpenter set out to begin building the team he needed to bring the film in on a 21-day shooting schedule. To that end, he made another bold request and lobbied to have his girlfriend, 27-year-old Deborah Hill, brought on board to produce The Babysitter Murders. At the time, Hill's experience was limited to script supervisor work on a handful of low-budget films.
One of my first jobs was a script supervisor working on a movie called Goodbye, Norma Jean. And then I met John Carpenter when he directed Assault on Precinct 13. And I was his script supervisor and assistant editor.
So there's a lot of trust going on. And I knew Deborah could handle the job.
It's all right with me. If you think she's good, put her in there.
All of a sudden, it's John and Deborah are going to make a movie. And of course, wait, she was script supervisor on the last picture, so everybody's kind of looking at each other like, how's this going to work?
Hill jumped at the chance to produce her first film, and as the unproven couple began to hash out the details of the script, producer Yablans had a stroke of inspiration, and that stroke of inspiration changed everything. As director John Carpenter and his screenwriting partner Deborah Hill began working out the details of The Babysitter Murders for producer Irwin Yablans, Yablans made an important suggestion.
We were searching for a story. You know, what could the story be?
And I think it was because of Halloween time that suddenly Halloween popped into my mind. I got on the phone, I called John Carpenter. And I said, John, I told him the idea. And I said, and what if I told you I wanted to call it Halloween? He got it immediately. He got really excited. He said, that's brilliant.
When he called and came up with the brilliant idea of using the themes of Halloween to tell our story, it was like a gold mine.
And they looked into it, and the assumption was, well, somebody's made a movie called Halloween by now. I mean, you know, it was 1977, 78. Nobody had ever made a movie called Halloween. Nobody had ever made a movie with Halloween in the title.
It was hard to believe there had never been a movie with that title before. Hard to figure that out.
With a new title and a distinctive hook, Hill and Carpenter began to work on the script.
We went to a list of scares. You know, like imagine if, you know, you're in bed with your boyfriend and he goes down to get some water or a Coke or something and comes back with a sheet trying to pretend he's a ghost, but it's not him. And then we decided to weave the scares into the story. I wrote the first draft and John came back with a pass for the Sam Loomis character.
The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
So all the stuff about evil and everything is really John's.
The screenwriting pair took great pains to establish a sense of reality to the film's characters and proceedings.
Deborah Hill wrote the girls' dialogue, and she brought a real palpable sense of what girls talked about.
Sure. Old Jerko got caught throwing eggs and soaping windows.
The kind of thing that you usually didn't see in exploitation movies. You didn't hear girls talk like girls. You usually just saw girls who were hot.
Deborah really wrote dialogue that sounded like, you know, the real people.
This movie was just ordinary conversation that could happen in any city, anywhere, which makes their killing all the more senseless and all the more realistic.
Once the real world was in place, the unimaginable could exist. Only this time, the mythic monster wouldn't rise from a coffin in Transylvania. This time, he would live right next door.
Modern horror films really began with Psycho.
Psycho began this trend with a maniac killer, with shocking horror.
Before then, horror movies were pretty much Gothic situations with old castles and cobwebs, and it was costume melodramas. And there were werewolves and mummies, and they were always related to castles and sort of Victorian romance. And Psycho kind of moved it to the modern stage. It literally had a motel, and in back of it, here was this Gothic house.
If Alfred Hitchcock moved horror away from the Gothic and into the real world, it was Carpenter's plan to turn realistic horror into modern myth.
So what am I going to do with this Halloween thing? Well, I'll try to kick it into another place with the screenplay. This killer, masked, unknown, faceless, and a force of nature, as opposed to a human being.
Into this narrative, Hill and Carpenter wove a number of inside references. Haddonfield was in fact the town in New Jersey where Deborah Hill grew up. Sam Loomis was named after the character played by John Gavin in Hitchcock's Psycho. Sheriff Lee Brackett shared a name with the screenwriter of Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. And the film's relentless antagonist was a tribute to a film distributor who championed Assault on Precinct 13 in the UK.
There was a man named Michael Myers who wanted to see me about the film. And he entered the London Film Festival, and lo and behold, it became a great success.
Carpenter was very grateful and thought he'd give him a very strange sort of thank you, because I guess the guy's like the sweetest guy in the world, and you know, he names this psychotic killer after him. There have been worse tributes, but yeah.
To help bring the script to life, Carpenter recruited a childhood friend from Kentucky, Tommy Lee Wallace, who had also moved to Hollywood to try his hand at the movie business.
I was hired ostensibly as the production designer and also the editor. Those two jobs don't work well together. You know, you can forget sleep.
One of Wallace's first responsibilities was to develop the look for the film's killer, escaped mental patient Michael Myers, referred to in the script only as the Shape. Wearing a mask depicting the blank, neutral features of a man, Wallace knew this contribution could make or break the film.
John instructed me to go out and find something that hopefully was plain and didn't call attention to itself in some strange way. The choices: Richard Nixon, Mr. Spock, Captain Kirk. I also picked up an Emmett Kelly mask, which is the classic sad clown. Nick Castle was there doing the modeling for us. And he came out in that Emmett Kelly mask, and it was unmistakable that the effect was eerie. Then Nick came out with the Captain Kirk mask. He won by default because he was the plainest face.
We changed a lot. We opened up the eye sockets, we changed the hair.
Yanked off the sideburns and spray painted the whole thing white, fish belly white. Oh, it was horrifying. It was so scary that we immediately knew, if nothing else, our movie was going to work. Maybe nobody go see it, but it was going to be scary.
Tommy Lee Wallace's creation exceeded everyone's expectations.
He's got the devil's eyes, the darkest eyes, but all around him is white. That's enormously creepy. It reflects sort of all your fears. I mean, there are no features in it. We sort of put onto it our own feelings about it. It's almost like a Rorschach test.
With the film's central image in place, Wallace turned his attention to his many other duties. Job 1. Make Southern California look like Haddonfield, Illinois, a fictional Midwest suburb.
The streets out there have these big California live oaks that, although they're not native to Haddonfield, Illinois, which doesn't even exist, they were gnarly and strange, and it didn't matter. I think most of the audience bought that. It was like, oh, spooky trees. That's all we needed.
As the film's visuals took shape, the production now needed a cinematographer to capture them. Hill turned to Dean Cundy, the director of photography she'd worked with on such B pictures as Bare Knuckles and Satan's Cheerleaders.
It was the time of the drive-in theater, and B movies had a place. And so I was fortunate to be able to learn on a lot of these old, action movies.
You won't believe this. They're going to kill us. Come on, we got to get out of here fast. What'd you hear? There's no time. Come on.
It was a great serendipitous moment to meet with John and to go off on this adventure that became Halloween.
The next mission for the filmmakers was to cast the film. With a minuscule budget, famous faces were out of the question, and the film would rest on the uncertain shoulders of a 19-year-old newcomer. But this newcomer would bring with her one serious horror pedigree. In the spring of 1978, 30-year-old John Carpenter agreed to deliver a low-budget horror film to producers Irwin Yablans and Mustafa Akkad. With his core crew in place, Carpenter next turned his attention to the other side of the lens. Determined to fill his frame with attractive, professional, and most importantly, affordable talent. For the fun-loving, slightly bubble-headed Linda, Carpenter set his sights on PJ Soles, an actress who impressed him 2 years earlier in Brian De Palma's Carrie.
I thought she was just great in Carrie, and just a real great actress.
When I got the call to meet with a director, it was like, wow, I mean, not a casting agent first, you actually got to see the director. So we proceeded to read a scene, and it was one of the scenes where I had to say the word totally.
3 new cheers to learn in the morning. The game is in the afternoon. I have to get my hair done at 5, and the dance is at 8. I'll be totally wiped out.
I don't think you have enough to do tomorrow.
Totally.
And after I finished reading, he said, wow, you're the only one that said the word totally the way I hear it. And I said, are you kidding? What other way is there to say totally? And he said, well, that's why you got the part.
Totally. Totally. Well, she's totally not here.
Among the cast of new faces, PJ's was the most recognizable.
PJ Soles was the big star, really, and she was great fun.
See anything you like?
To cast the role of Annie Brackett, the production didn't look far.
Nancy Kyes, then Loomis, my ex-wife.
I had known her through Tommy Wallace, and he was her husband at the time. And she was a very accomplished actress. I really liked her.
I worked on Assault on Precinct 13, and that's how I got involved, just through those connections.
God, I've got a shirt on. That's all you ever think about.
For the central role of Laurie Strode, and seeing an opportunity to give their scrappy little film something of a horror pedigree, producer Deborah Hill suggested a 19-year-old unknown with a unique connection to another horror classic. Her mother was Janet Leigh, star of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
But Deborah brought up Jamie Lee Curtis. She was under contract at Universal. And Deborah thought it'd be a great idea to do, that would tie into the whole Janet Leigh Psycho business.
I'm sure that it was an added, kind of fun added bonus for them.
We saw a lot of girls to play the Laurie Strode character, and Jamie was just so vulnerable and so real and so fresh.
And Jamie came in, and she was 19, and she was really sweet, and just did a great reading, so we cast her. It was that simple.
Well, kiddo, I thought you outgrew superstition.
I was surprised I was cast, period, because I'm an actor and you can't ever imagine somebody's going to hire you.
Producer Irwin Yablans ran with it.
I'm going to have a picture of Jamie Lee Curtis here and a picture of Janet Leigh here. I want you to pose her just like her mother did in Psycho. You know, there are two ways to sell a movie. There's publicity and there's advertising. Advertising costs money, publicity is free, and more effective, I might add.
Aside from her familial association with the Hitchcock classic, the casting seemed an odd fit to the effervescent young actress, and she didn't mind saying so.
I remember Jamie said, well, you have the fun part. And I went, well, you have the lead, and which is the coveted part, no matter what it is.
He had 3 choices for girls. And the weird thing is, I'm a combo of all 3.
Lindsay is gone for the night.
I was a cheerleader in high school, so I am naturally a cheerleader. And I'm naturally a sarcastic little.
I hate a guy with a car and no sense of humor.
And then I am ultimately a good girl. And so, in a weird way, they chose that one, which turned out to be good for me. But you could have cast me as any of them.
Ultimately, Curtis came to understand the logic of Carpenter's casting.
I was a little worried because he used the word vulnerable. I didn't really understand what it meant. I understood the word, but I really now understand that what John wanted was to be vulnerable means that somebody else wants to take care of you, that there's something about you that other people want to protect.
We're watching her and we know something's going to happen to her. We're powerless to help her, but we're in her world and we feel almost like we're alongside her.
Offsetting the largely teen cast was the role of Dr. Sam Loomis. Carpenter and Yablans agreed a recognizable character actor was key.
It was another Erwin Yablans suggestion. We should cast somebody as a psychiatrist that the audience would know.
He hasn't spoken a word in 15 years.
Dr. Loomis is the voice of exposition on Michael Myers' history in Halloween. And we get all of this great, really sort of flowery dialogue about Michael Myers, about his eyes, the devil's eyes, the darkest eyes. And it helps to have a classically trained actor and someone with a great voice playing this part.
The production approached veteran horror actors Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
I really got upset with that. I said, look, you put those guys in this movie and it's just another Christopher Lee, another Peter Cushing movie.
What was in there? I told you, a fossil, part ape, part man. It lived.
Years after we had originally asked Christopher Lee to play the Sam Loomis role, we ran into him. He said, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I should have been in your film.
With both actors passing, producer Yablans couldn't have been happier.
I had seen a movie called Will Penny, and there was a man in there who played, he was a Western roamer, he was with a wild, crazy eye. He was a madman, and it was Donald Pleasence. And I said, what do you think of Donald Pleasence? John immediately liked it. That's a great idea. I said, call Donald Pleasence up and offer him the role. I don't think he'll take it, but give it a try.
59-year-old Donald Pleasence, who had built an impressive resume appearing in major films such as You Only Live Twice and The Great Escape, agreed to meet with Carpenter.
I saw Assault on Precinct 13, and I admired it a lot.
He said, my daughter's in a rock and roll band in London, and she liked the music from your film Assault on Precinct 13. But otherwise, I have no clue why I'm here or who my character is.
So there are parts of the script which I can't accept. I believe people are behaving in a way in which they couldn't possibly in real life behave. And that's always difficult, because if you're one of the people, then you're the one who's going to look like an idiot.
That scared me to death. I didn't know what to say to him.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Pleasence accepted the role, receiving $25,000 for 5 days' work, effectively doubling the film's casting budget.
That became the single biggest budget item, $25,000, which they came back to me and asked if I would approve. And I said, if you can get Donald Pleasence, we'll get we'll get the 25. That's why the budget was $325 instead of $300, by the way.
It happened here.
It was a big deal when he was working. They brought in a trailer for Donald. On the days he was working, there was a car that brought him to work. I mean, I think they definitely made him feel special, because he was the big star coming in to our little movie.
There was one more role left to fill, a role one might think could be played by just about anyone. But Carpenter turned to a former film school buddy, Nick Castle.
He said, you know, we haven't cast the killer. Why don't you be the killer? And I went, well, I'm not an actor. I can't act. I'm horrible in front of a camera. I'm really stiff. And he went, no, we're going to have a mask over the guy the whole time. You just walk around. And I said, well, yeah, that's a good idea. I get to go be on the set the whole time, see how people work. It was actually, from that standpoint too, a really good education for me.
For most of the supporting cast, the film was a short-term gig.
Excuse me,
Oh,
Laurie.
Mr. Brackett, I'm sorry, Mr. Brackett. I was involved maybe 7 or 8 days.
You know, it's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
And it wasn't great money, trust me. No, but what the heck, I said, it's work.
I worked 4 days. You worked 3? Do you have any idea?
You know what? I don't remember. To me, it felt like a very long time. The thing I remember the most is sitting there watching the scary movie. I feel like I watched that movie for 6 months straight. That's what it felt like at the time. When I look back, okay, we weren't filming that long. I was shocked that we'd only filmed that many days. I thought we were like filming forever on that movie because it felt like it at the time.
The boogeyman is coming. Leave me alone.
That was the scene we shot the most because I could not fall on the pumpkin and have it break open. So they saw that it would not crush the first time, so they cut a little hole in it. It took like 7 times for me to fall on that pumpkin before it finally broke.
3 big days. 3 days.
I'll be right back. Don't get dressed.
The classic line I think I have is, don't get dressed. I'll be right back.
Whether they were day players or principals, much of the young cast were shocked by Carpenter's casual attitude toward their performances.
Rehearsing? This is a 21-day shoot.
I remember going up to him and saying, you know, what do you want from this character? And am I giving you what you want? And he said, just find your spot and say your line. And at the time, I was like, oh, how, it's awful. And it wasn't until, years later when I realized, the reason you were cast in the film is because of you.
The philosophy I believe he operates from is, I hired you because I believe you have it in you to give this, so give it.
With casting completed and the first day of shooting approaching, Carpenter and cinematographer Dean Cundy began designing the film's more intricate sequences and quickly realized Carpenter's grandiose plans were about to collide with the reality of a 21-day shoot. The young director would need something close to a miracle to meet his deadlines. With a cast of fresh faces and 1 veteran character actor, production on Halloween was underway in the spring of 1978. But as John Carpenter and his crew began descending on their Southern California locations, they discovered the real impact of the film's tight schedule.
Well, very quickly, as we were shooting, I realized the elaborate plans that I had would have to go by the wayside. I'm going to have to simplify this movie because we don't have the time.
Carpenter and his cinematographer Dean Cundy made a decision to utilize a brand new device that would keep the production moving and give the film its signature look.
The device we actually used was the Panaglide, which was Panavision's version of the Steadicam.
You put the camera on a gyroscopic mount on an operator and you just run around.
For a movie that had a budget of $300,000 and just a couple of days to shoot, that ability to go on the fly to get these amazing looking shots really takes Halloween from just a cheap horror movie into something that is more artistic and really more effective.
So it enabled us to move the camera in a more fluid way, in a way that was not really possible before then.
We could turn around, we could go upstairs, and cross streets. It was absolutely freeing, so I just used it compulsively.
The Steadicam was used to great effect 2 years earlier in John Avildsen's Rocky, but where Avildsen used the invention to build momentum and ramp up energy, Carpenter and crew saw in the device an opportunity to create suspense.
And so the idea that you could do a subjective point of view and be in the killer's eyes, but not have To have it be jittery and handheld, have it be this gliding, strange effect, really added hugely to the overall tension and eeriness.
Also adding to that suspense were Dean Cundey's lighting choices.
Some of the techniques in the lighting was creating a sense of foreboding in the outside areas, which we did with blue light.
In addition to the film's distinctive lighting scheme, Cundey was responsible for several innovative in-camera tricks.
Suddenly, up from the darkness, coming into the light would be this white mask. That's enormously creepy.
The thought was, well, in the dark, as your eyes gradually get used to being able to see, you begin to see shapes and things in a dark room. So I put a light that was very small and specifically aimed right at Michael Myers' face as he's hiding in the dark right next to Jamie Lee, and then had it on a dimmer so that I could turn it and slowly the light would expose him just barely.
And it's these little touches that Cundey was able to bring that elevate this movie that was meant to be seen in a drive-in, on a double bill, while you're making out in the backseat with your girlfriend, into something that is real, honest, artful cinema.
Carpenter's creativity extended to the film's limited resources, spending the money where it counted most.
He made damn sure that three things happened: that the film got shot in Panavision with the best lenses they had, that it was processed at MGM Labs, which is the best around, and that it do its post-production at Goldwyn Sound, which was the best sound house in town. That meant that our crappy little $300,000 movie could look like millions.
The meager budget wasn't the only challenge confronted by the production.
Obviously, we're shooting in California, and it's supposed to be Illinois, and it's supposed to be Halloween, so it's supposed to be October.
We created fall with 3 trash bags full of painted leaves. We would scatter these colored leaves around in the foreground, the opening, couple of opening shots of the film.
And at the end of the shooting of the scene, the wind might pick up or whatever. Deborah would yell, "Everybody, come on, Hal, get the leaves!" And we would gather every last leaf and put it back in the bag because it's hard to find maple leaves, crunchy, orangey maple leaves in California. So it was always really funny. It was like, oh, I'm not a leaf gatherer, I'm an actress.
Everybody did every job. There were job specifications, but then everybody did everybody's job.
I was doing set dressing and props and costumes, because if you're just doing acting, it's so boring.
While the crew dealt with logistical obstacles behind the scenes, Halloween's green cast was confronting its own issues in front of the lens, especially first-time film star Jamie Lee Curtis.
Jamie Lee had a lot to prove. She had a big name, and she wanted to show that she had the talent to go with it and that she wasn't just skating by on who her parents were. But she was scared.
I had done a day's work on this movie and was sitting at home, and my roommate answered the phone. She said, "It's John Carpenter." And it is often in show business that you get fired. People get fired after a day or two of work.
John called her after the first day's shooting to let her know how happy he was with the way things were going, and she thought she was being fired.
It was just very sweet. He called to say that he was really happy. How good he thought it was and how happy he was of this first day's work, and felt good.
Standing in contrast to Curtis's uncertainty was P.J. Soles, who eased Carpenter through directing his first nude scene.
The scene in the bedroom was interesting because John was more nervous than I was. It wasn't in the script, but he wanted some kind of nudity.
It was written in the script, and she shows her breasts in the script, so I just assumed she was okay to do it.
He approached me really kind of, silently and embarrassed, and he said, "Is there any way that we could just show whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll clear the room, and it'll just be me and Dean."
I don't ever remember having a conversation about the nude scene with PJ.
I put down the sheet and did a quick flash.
See anything you like?
That has become a pretty popular phrase, see anything you like?
We shot it on that day, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful, it was great.
John was like, oh, that was great, but he didn't want to talk about it beyond that, you know. So I always thought that was very sweet and very considerate, and I really liked that about John.
It's all bullshit.
One thing everyone could agree on, the man behind the mask was decidedly unscary.
I always thought Michael Myers was really funny, you know, because I know that it's Nick Castle standing behind that mask.
I just remember him as being a young father who happened to be walking around in a latex mask with a knife.
He had to put a telephone cord around my neck, and he just wouldn't pull it hard. He kept tickling my throat, and I was laughing most of the time, and finally I said, Nick, please, you're gonna have to put some pressure on. He said, I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to hurt you.
I'm not an actor, I don't do this all the time. You're kind of concerned, what are you doing to another human being, even if it is pretend?
I said, I know, but I have to die here, so you're gonna have to just pull a little harder. And he just really never would. I mean, ultimately he did it a little bit, but I really had to act.
You want to make it look real, but you also want to make sure that she can live to act again.
And unlike his on-screen counterpart, Castle was hardly invulnerable.
The worst scene I can remember was the one which is supposedly outside of the insane asylum. What I was supposed to do is jump onto the car, and I went, okay, at the rehearsal, I jump onto the car, good, let's go. We're 4 in the morning and really, really cold, and then John said, okay, turn on the hoses. And I said, this is the rain scene? So they turned on the hoses, and that's when I realized that John had put me at 40 degrees in cold water with just a hospital gown. And that was supposed to be my friend. It was the most painful time I have ever had, probably on a set.
I never tortured him. He's lying to you.
Despite Castle's hard work, the film would ultimately require no less than 5 people to don the iconic mask, including another newcomer to portray the face behind the shape. As the spring of 1978 progressed, John Carpenter's crew worked feverishly to get Halloween in the can in the allotted 21 days. In the middle of this hustle, new cinematic ground was being broken in the form of the film's masked killer, a figure utterly devoid of personality.
Michael Myers himself is a blank slate. He's called in the script the Shape. You can't be any more blank than just being the Shape.
It was addition by subtraction. Up to this point, in horror, the villains were colorful, larger-than-life characters. Halloween pioneered the idea of an impenetrable, unknowable antagonist.
On the call sheet, it says The Shape, which is right away kind of an interesting insight, because there was something about that as more of an idea rather than a specific person.
The only other character I think who is similar to Michael Myers in modern horror is the shark in Jaws. It's just an unstoppable thing. How do you stop it? You probably can. It's going to keep coming back, and it just does what it does. And in this case, what it does is stalk kids and kill them.
If you make Michael Myers more than Michael Myers, if you make him the Shape, if you make him the embodiment of evil and the boogeyman, we will believe, for instance, that if there's a window anywhere, he's already climbed through it.
Oh no.
So Michael Myers, of course, the man who can catch you while you're running and he's walking at a slow pace, has to be more than just a man, because a man can't do those things.
We hear an awful lot about his character, but when he appears, we don't see him very well, and it's mindless killing.
Nothing really explains what Michael is. So to make him the Shape, we can also take human psychology out of it. We can say that's not even an issue. As Loomis says, he is purely and simply evil.
Nevertheless, a character did start to come through, largely due to the work of Castle.
Nick had a way of moving. when he moved, he kind of glided around in an eerie way.
There wasn't a lot of direction per se. I mean, I remember asking John initially, I had to walk across the street. I said, so what do you want me to do? You know, I'm trying to figure out what my method should be. And he said, just walk across the street. Okay, just walk and it'll be fine.
Despite Castle's misgivings, he and Carpenter collaborated to successfully give the film's faceless killer just the right amount of personality.
The thing I love is that he was able to actually make it a character. He does some really good work in this. There are a couple moments where he's just very effective.
Come on out.
The Shape's signature moment comes during the death of Linda's boyfriend, Bob, played by John Graham.
Actually opening the doors where he jumps out at me with a knife was actually really scary. The only scary moment on the set while I was there was that moment.
What played as a relatively straightforward bit of action in the script required a considerable amount of cinematic sleight of hand.
When you see my feet going off the ground, I'm actually being lifted up by two guys. They had a 2x4 that I was sort of hanging over, and two big guys lifted me up. When he's pushing me up against the wall, I'm standing on a box and just sort of standing up. The long shot of me hanging on the wall, I'm actually holding the knife under my arm. I think my best performance in the film are my feet. The brilliant foot death, I think, is really classic, you know, little tragic little feet dying.
The scene became famous for a bit of body language direction from John Carpenter.
After he sticks Bob to the wall with the knife, he steps back and he cocks his head. And it's like a dog. There's like something so removed from human about him at that point.
As an actor where you're expressionless, there's nothing really you bring to the party other than however you wind up standing. And John was the one that basically directed this character. Well, John could have been this character because he's the one that did things like, okay, just tilt your head like this after you stab him so that you're kind of admiring him.
It's creepy. It's creepy. That's the beauty of the film.
The Shape represents another cinematic first. The killer who will not die. Horror fans were used to their classic monsters returning in sequel after sequel, but never before was a seemingly human antagonist so hard to put down.
That's scary to see him coming back again and again. That was one of the first films of that time to do that.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
Michael just slowly rises and turns his head. And it's out of focus, and it's in the back, and it's perfect.
I don't know that John directed him to do that. I think he figured out that little moment.
Though Castle had provided The Shape with much of its on-screen personality, when it came time for the climactic unmasking scene, in which audiences briefly glimpsed the adult Michael Myers, it was quickly decided that Nick Castle's face just wouldn't do.
Michael Myers needed a face and a moment in the movie because Nick just didn't look like what John's vision of Michael Myers should be. Too old, for one thing.
A casting call was sent out to find the face behind the face of evil. 21-year-old Tony Moran was interviewed.
John Carpenter said they were looking for somebody with an angelic face. And that's the exact word he used. And I'm like, well, okay. Well, I never thought I had an angelic face, but.
After a brief meeting with Carpenter and Irwin Yablans, Moran was cast.
When I got there, I talked to John Carpenter a little bit, and he had shown me the mask. I didn't even know I had to wear a mask until I got to the set. Nobody said anything about that.
The inexperienced young actor was impressed with the level of efficiency on set.
John Carpenter had everything meticulously planned down to centimeters so that we didn't have to do more than 2 or 3 takes. It was an incredible experience. It was a crazy, crazy day.
In total, 5 people wore the mask in the film, besides Moran and Castle. Stuntman Jim Winburn donned the outfit for several shots. And Deborah Hill even suited up for one wide shot when no one else was available.
Well, I needed to go pick up some trick-or-treat shots, second unit. So not only was I going to direct the second unit, but I brought the costume and I was going to be the shape. So I put this shape costume on, and of course I'm so much tinier than Nick. And in dailies it was so hilarious because the shape had shrunk.
Lastly, production designer Tommy Lee Wallace played the shape for one of the film's most harrowing scenes.
I got my chance because we could move faster, we found, if I put on the outfit and the mask when we had to break something, because I would have prepared that set. I knew how to hit the thing to make it break correctly on take 1 rather than take 4. It was as simple as that. And I thought I'd performed pretty well in that closet.
Carpenter's film was coming together, and without the chaos and strain that normally accompanied such shoestring productions.
It's a real confidence builder for the director to walk on the set and say, here's the list, here's what we're doing today, and it's going to start right over here with a 35mm lens.
I think let him pull his gun out.
Let's get to work. And it gave everyone confidence that we could really pull this off.
Carpenter's confidence had gotten them this far, but that same confidence was about to test the limits of the small production as Carpenter decided to gamble the entire last day of filming on one single shot. As the final day of shooting on Halloween drew near, John Carpenter's film was shaping up to be everything he'd hoped.
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Just as importantly, the film was coming in on budget, thanks to meticulous planning and creative shooting. As the production wound to a close, Carpenter prepared his crew for the film's most ambitious shot, a 4-minute-long, single-tracking shot that would introduce the audience to the young and psychotic Michael Myers.
The opening shot of Halloween, the long, continuous camera move that starts across the street, goes up to the house, looks in the windows of the house.
We are alone, aren't we?
Michael's around someplace.
And then enters the house. And then goes upstairs to see the young girl get killed.
It was the kind of shot that was legendarily difficult, even in big-budget studio films, such as Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, famous for its 3.5-minute-long unbroken shot. For a low-budget horror film, it was unheard of. With no money and no time left, Carpenter, who had never attempted such a challenging shot, was determined.
It was going to be the opening of the film and, needed to be the storytelling shot, but also perhaps even remembered.
As Carpenter's camera team mapped out a way to capture the shot, the rest of the cast and crew turned their attention to the dilapidated Myers house, pitching in to paint and wallpaper portions of the house to make it appear 15 years younger, as called for in the script.
They finished the regular filming, and then the entire crew on the last day of the movie, me included, whitewash the old house in Pasadena to make it look like the house at the beginning of the movie.
John took me through, and I asked him to be very precise about what the camera was going to do. And believe me, if you panned the camera a little to the right or to the left, just an old skanky house, it was only nice through the lens. Just that much wallpaper, just that little chandelier, just that little table with the nice setting on it. Everywhere else, it was just a really trashed out old house.
Once the house was restored as needed, cinematographer Dean Cundy worked out the choreography of the shot with his Panaglide operator, Ray Stella.
The difficulty was that as we approached the house and looked in the window, You have to hide lights to light the various walls and the kids watching television. And then as you enter the house, the camera was now going to be looking at the places where we had hidden all of the lights.
We go around the house, and as we're coming in the back door to look the other direction, all you hear on the soundtrack is the crew switching lights in a different direction. They're right ahead of us. So we come in and everything's lit. We go up the stairs and they're switching it back around again. It was incredible.
There would be this sigh if they cut the camera, because then you know that they didn't get the shot. And, you know, people would be like running around inside, moving lights because there weren't enough lights. It was amazing to watch.
Ray Stella was running up and down steps with the Panaglide, and it was killing him. It was really wearing him out.
Stella performed take after take of the shot while wearing the 70-pound apparatus.
I tried it on, and I would never wear it again. You have to be really strong. It's rough, but it was like a new frontier. It was beautiful.
We did it all the way through successfully maybe once, and then we broke it into pieces.
There are actually cuts in the shot.
We had a couple of excuses, you know. The mask goes onto the camera. That was a breaking place.
The scene ends with yet another actor playing Michael Myers, this time as a 6-year-old boy.
Michael? When I see the movie now, I saw myself kind of flinch a little bit. I mean, that was that plastic mask with the rubber band around the ears, and as he was taking it off, I mean, there were times where it was just painful. That was the hardest part of the whole scene, was just taking off the mask without it hurting.
With the film's signature opening sequence in the can, the film wrapped, on time and on budget.
We didn't know what we had there. I mean, it seemed like it was kind of suspenseful.
It was a movie. I mean, it was a full movie, and I was in it. I mean, and it worked, and I knew it worked.
Carpenter's demand for creative control seemed to have paid off.
One person's in control. You don't have to stop and go and have a phone call, consult a committee, have the group from the front office come down, have late night meetings. The buck stops right there, so you can get on with it.
Carpenter's planning on set revealed itself in the editing room, where Wallace began to assemble the carefully considered shots into a rough cut.
Halloween cut together pretty much like butter. It was a great experience in the cutting room. My first time in the driver's seat.
Every scene is put together perfectly. There's no fat on this movie for one reason, I think. They didn't have the money to make fat scenes. In other words, I would bet very few scenes landed on the cutting room floor. And that was great for a director. In that sense, Carpenter was like Hitchcock, who planned every scene in his head, they say, before he shot. And he did it because he had to.
What can I get by with here? What can I play in one shot? It's all necessity, is the mother of invention.
But as tightly mapped out as the film was, several crucial creative decisions were made during post-production.
Donald Pleasence shoots the shape. He falls off this balcony, lands in the yard. And there's a scene where Donald Pleasence comes up to the balcony to look down, and the shape's not there. He says, there are two ways I can play this. One is, oh my God, he's gone. Or, I knew this would happen. I thought, wow, that's a choice. Can you do both for me, Donald? So he did. And I knew this would happen was the chilling take.
The exact right ending is Loomis, this guy, this Ahab who's chasing his white whale of Michael Myers, knows that in the end he can't stop him.
The shape's unstoppable nature was cemented in the film's final montage, designed to send audiences out of the theater terrified that the shape was still out there.
The ending was manufactured to some degree in the cutting room. It turned out to be an important choice because the whole idea of the shape never dying was just totally reinforced by the idea that he could be anywhere. So you have this string of shots that were really just grabbed just before a slate would come in, or just before the action would stop, or just before an actor would enter the frame. But it was just usually just from, this is just barely enough to have a shot, you know. But that worked out pretty well.
The filmmakers were on a creative high as their little film moved through post-production. But a nearly unanimous critical reaction would soon send them crashing back to reality. As Carpenter and his editing team approached a final cut on Halloween in the summer of 1978, the eager young director decided to screen a print for executives around Hollywood.
There was an executive from a studio, and I'm still trying to get jobs. I showed her my latest movie.
To Carpenter's surprise, the executive was unimpressed.
She said, movies like this don't scare me. They aren't scary.
Carpenter was stunned, but it was an important lesson. The film's score had not yet been added. And without it, the film was utterly ineffective. Carpenter rolled up his sleeves and began the considerable task of composing the score. For inspiration, he recalled a lesson from his father, himself a musician.
The main theme is simply a piano version of 5/4 time that my father taught me how to play when I was young. On a pair of bongos. It's really basic, which I think is why it's effective. It's a piano score. It's effective because it's repetitious, it's simple. And that's about it. It was done in 3 days.
The score literally transformed the film.
The picture with music obviously was a whole other entity. It was just an incredible experience.
The music was another character. It alerts you to danger, but it was used judiciously, and that's what I liked. It wasn't overbearing.
I felt like it was like the music box from hell. It had a slight, nursery feeling to the music, but then it was electronic and metallic and kind of insistent.
It's about building the tension with the repetitive, simplistic nature of the music. And it's maybe the greatest horror score of all time, and it's one of the greatest cinema scores of all time. You hear that theme and you know exactly what it is that you're in for.
His vision and his sense of music match.
It's not overpowering, it's just right below the level of subconscious.
The music freaked me out. Now I hear that and I think that music is so genius, it's unbelievable.
And when I saw it with the music, it was terrifying. And the sound effects, and I saw it on the big screen, it was a dramatic shift in my point of view.
I mean, I truly believe he was sitting at home and went, I mean, I really do think he just sat there.
Carpenter saw his role as composer as nothing more than pragmatic.
I wrote and performed the music for Halloween because I'm cheap and I'm fast.
As you can imagine, after months in the cutting room, I was getting pretty sick of it. But man, effective? Are you kidding? I hear it on the street now in ringtones.
I've subsequently taken it off, but I used to, my phone would ring and you'd hear the Halloween theme song. It's impressive.
Carpenter screened the film once more for the previously unimpressed studio executive.
6 months later, with the music in place, she came back and said it was one of the scariest movies that she had ever seen.
After I put the music on it, she had seen it again and said, I was really wrong. And I said, that's okay, that's all right, but it shows the effect of music.
The completed film made its premiere in October of 1978, but the film distribution landscape was a much different place in the late 70s than today.
When Halloween premiered in 1978, it was given this sort of very piecemeal release.
Meaning you start in California and you have a certain amount of prints. You show them in Los Angeles. And they move them to San Diego. Then they move them to Phoenix. Then they move them around the country.
You might open a picture in New York City and it might not find its way into Kansas City for 2 or 3 months.
It's not like today where a film opens in 3,000 theaters and it's the one film you go see that weekend. It was a very different time.
The United States only 40 or 50 years ago, each market was a world unto itself.
But as the little film moved from one city to the next, it racked up little more than a pile of negative reviews.
The reviews came in, they were awful. You know, just putting the movie down. As far as I knew, it was a complete bomb. And I got a call from Deborah, and she said, well, this one didn't make it.
The lowest point for the filmmakers came during a screening at USC's film school, Carpenter's alma mater. What they had hoped to be a triumphant return of the prodigal son turned out to be a less than warm reception.
We all went down and they ran the movie for an audience of students. And then afterwards, we sat on the stage and we answered questions regarding it. And there was one guy who raised his hand, and John said, yes, you in the back. And the guy said, well, first of all, why in the world, here you are, a film student, why in the world would you make that kind of movie? I mean, this is just a low-class, trashy horror film. And with that, he got up and left.
And as Halloween continued to stumble from market to market, most critics seemed to agree with the outraged student. But 2 significant reviews were about to transform Halloween from a low-budget failure into a word-of-mouth box office phenomenon. In October of 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween was released on an unsuspecting audience who promptly ignored it.
I think we were a little disappointed in the very beginning.
I'm a little bit embarrassed and ashamed. I actually got an invitation to the premiere. I threw it away. Because I figured, it's a horror flick with a guy with a mask. I mean, who's gonna watch that?
Limping along a regional release pattern, one city at a time, the film was shaping up to be a box office bomb. As receipts trickled in, its makers accepted its fate.
As far as I knew, Halloween was just another movie I could show as something for my reel, but was not particularly successful at the box office.
Writing off the film as little more than another entry on their resumes, the cast and crew moved on.
I did a Love Boat episode with my mother. I did a Charlie's Angels, where I played a pro golfer.
Alan Arkish says he saw Halloween and wanted me to play Riff Randall in Rock and Roll High School.
The film also led to an unusual follow-up gig for its director.
I got Elvis right after I had finished directing Halloween because they said, well, he knows music. Because he did the music to Halloween, so he'll know music and he'll be able to direct this.
As Halloween's theatrical run began to peter out, its cast, crew, and financiers were all ready to write it off as a low-budget blip on the Hollywood radar. But in late 1978, 2 critics rescued the film from its drive-in ghetto. The first was Tom Allen from The Village Voice.
Halloween didn't really take off until the Village Voice critic Tom Allen reviewed it and said, you know, just what a superb thriller it was, how perfectly executed the film was.
Soon after, Roger Ebert gave Halloween 4 stars, comparing the film favorably to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
I remember doing an interview with Roger Ebert, who had seen it, and I couldn't figure out, why is he talking to me? What does he care? But he's very flattering about the movie, and I thought, wow, that's nice.
They both wrote glowing reviews of the picture. They got it.
They both raved about it, and then the snowball just kind of started rolling and rolling.
I remember the grosses very well. They were about $200 and $300 per theater.
Word quickly spread that this low-budget horror film was in fact something special.
And by the weekend, it was $2,000 and $3,000. It was the most amazing example of the power of word of mouth.
You know, Halloween became this huge hit, and it was the movie everybody had to see.
That meant that everybody who went to see that film that night got on the phone and told 3 other people, and those 3 told 6 other people, and within 3 or 4 days, it was huge. I was so excited. I knew we had something special.
Yablans might have known, but Carpenter was still in the dark.
Apparently it grew. and it grew without me. I didn't know about it. And finally, a movie company came by and said, well, we want to make movies with you. So I figured something's up here, because they don't just do that. So I must have made somebody some money.
Eventually, the cast and crew were able to see the public's reaction firsthand.
I did go to see Halloween in a regular theater, and I was sitting in the theater and I'm watching it, and I'm like, oh my God, this thing is really, really good. This is a really scary movie, you know? And everybody in the audience was screaming and stuff, and I was just blown away.
I'll never forget, there was a scene where Jamie Lee Curtis keeps dropping the knife, you know, and after she dropped it for the third time, some guy in the back yelled out, "You deserve to die!" That's how involved the audience was.
John puts you up on the screen. That's not Jamie being stalked by a shape, that's you. And people are cheering. When Michael gets stabbed for the first time in the neck, people are actually cheering because they're saved.
Because it was done in a very sort of pure and stylish way, not obviously exploitational. That's what made the audience really identify with the characters and the situation.
All of those details accumulate and give you a sense of confidence so that from frame one in Halloween, you know you're watching a real, well-told story.
Although Halloween's success was rooted in its craftsmanship and attention to detail, today, fans delight in its handmade feel and enjoy spotting the occasional flaw inside the gem.
Everyone talks about how this movie is so perfect, but it's really riddled with imperfections. There was one scene with a palm tree in the background.
You watch the monster movies? Sure.
There's a scene in Halloween where after Michael steps out from behind the bush, Annie goes walking over and says,
"Hey, creep."
and then of course Michael's gone. And then she turns to Laurie and says, you know, so-and-so wants to talk with you, come on over here. And as she's doing it, you just see John Carpenter's smoke drifting into the frame. And it's just one of those things where you go, couldn't you have just taken that, shot that again? As the girls are finally walking away from the bush, you see one of the crew members' heads pop up over the bush in the background.
What are you gonna do?
Low-budget gaffes notwithstanding, the film was a bona fide smash. Eventually, Halloween would gross over $50 million, and it reigned for over a decade as the most profitable independent film in history. But what the film's cast and crew viewed at the time as a happy ending was in fact only the beginning. Spurred on by favorable reviews and killer word of mouth, John Carpenter's Halloween was a hit. The careers of everyone involved were off and running.
Halloween gave me a career, it gave me a name, it gave me a direction to go. It laid out the beginning of a movie career.
Everything changed for everybody after Halloween. John Carpenter, all of a sudden he had options. Deborah Hill all of a sudden finds doors opened up to her. She's able to move forward. Jamie Lee Curtis is totally thrust into the spotlight as the Scream Queen.
I had never prepared to be that. It wasn't something I liked. I don't like those kind of movies. I'm not a fan of them. But obviously I rode that train to the degree that I did, made a little money, and certainly became known for that.
But these sort of create the foundation of a career that she was able to sort of climb out of and do something bigger.
As the film's cast and crew graduated to larger budgets and flourishing careers, they didn't quite realize just what they had done to the horror genre.
You can sort of look at horror and it's before Halloween and then it's after Halloween.
People didn't only take the ideas that Halloween put forth, it also took the idea of, well, we're gonna set a horror film on a holiday. So we had Prom Night, Friday the 13th, Happy Birthday to Me.
You know, the fact that there wasn't an Arbor Day movie surprises me because, you know, there's an axe that comes naturally with that one. But every holiday that people could sort of, graduation day even, every holiday, any moment on the calendar that somebody could drench in blood, they drenched in blood.
I think maybe because Halloween was so cheap to make and it made a bunch of money, a lot of people copied it because they could see dollars. I think it was a cheap way of making a lot of money. So they copied a bunch of things about it.
After a monstrously successful release, the film's producers began to entertain the idea of continuing the story of Laurie Strode and her relentless pursuer. Jamie Lee Curtis decided to make 1981's Halloween 2 her Scream Queen swan song. Despite writing the sequel script, John Carpenter had no interest in directing a follow-up.
And it was at this point in the franchise history that the mythology came up around Halloween that Michael was really Laurie Strode's brother.
And I couldn't think of anything to do, so I didn't do a very good job with it.
There was some attempt to put some meat on the bones of this very almost minimalist thriller that Halloween was. And in some ways, I think that actually almost ruined the Halloween films, because suddenly now we're starting to understand what drives Michael. He's just out to kill his sister.
But it was successful, and they wanted to make another one.
And another one, and another one. Fed by a rabid fan base, the franchise cranked out 4 more installments over the next 15 years. With the exception of Halloween 3, which tried unsuccessfully to break from the formula, each film added more and more background to a character whose initial appeal was the complete lack of backstory.
Jamie Lee Curtis no longer wants to be involved. Oh, he's out to kill his niece, you know? So, you take away some of the specialness of Michael Myers when you start ascribing human motives to him, and then, well, he's just killing his family members.
But the increasingly absurd plot twist didn't faze Donald Pleasence. Pleasence had grown comfortable in the role he originated over 5 days of shooting back in 1978.
Mustafa said that Donald Pleasence told him he would do 22 Halloween movies. So Mustafa said, okay, if you do 22, I'll do 22.
It was not to be, however. The film's series' beloved star died on February 2, 1995, 8 months before Halloween 6 was set to release.
He was a generous, funny, delightful human being.
Donald Pleasence was such an asset to that series and really brought something that people overlook, because they always think it's about Michael. But, there's a little bit of Dr. Loomis in everybody. He's the guy that's out to save the world.
On the 20th anniversary of the original film, the idea for the 7th installment came from Laurie Strode herself.
I said, let's make a movie where she makes a moment's choice. I'm willing to fight for my life, because to live another minute in fear is no life, and I'd rather die. And let's frickin' end it.
Halloween H2O received the strongest reviews since the original film was released back in 1978, and the return of Curtis gave the film a cachet missing from previous entries.
It was interesting to see an actor of her stature take on, what is essentially part 7 of a horror series again. And I think without her, I don't think that the series ever would have really came back.
Although Curtis thought she was giving the franchise some much-needed closure, she soon found herself relearning the lessons of the first film. You can't kill the boogeyman.
There was something in the contract that says they can never kill Michael Myers. They never told me. I said, guys, this entire movie is predicated on the fact that I chop his head off. So there's no possibility that he could ever come back. I'm not going to string along an audience again. I've kind of spent 20 years having people go, why'd you drop the scissors? Why'd you drop the thing? Why'd you drop the knife? They said, okay, so if you think he's dead, and the audience thinks he's dead, but he's not dead, is that good enough for you? So I thought, yeah, I guess.
2002's Halloween Resurrection would be the last film produced by Akkad. Tragedy struck on November 11, 2005, when Mustafa and his daughter Rima were killed by a suicide bomber in a hotel lobby in Jordan.
Mustafa was a shrewd man, and he had incredible intuition. Mustafa was one of the most intelligent men I've ever known. He had incredible instincts.
Sadly, Mustafa Akkad wasn't the only member of the original team lost in 2005. That same year, Deborah Hill succumbed to cancer at age 54. She left behind a legacy and an example from which women in Hollywood draw inspiration to this day.
When I think about Deborah, I think she was really a pioneer. She's one of my heroes. She really made inroads for women in the industry because she was one of the first women producers and so good at it. It was her natural calling.
Deborah and I were best girlfriends. I wouldn't be sitting here today if it weren't for Deborah Hill. I'm just truly to my core grateful for that opportunity because it gave me everything I have.
Now approaching 30 years old, it seemed as if the franchise had finally run out of steam. But as the horror genre entered the 21st century, a wildly successful remake boom was reimagining nearly every horror staple of the 1970s. A Halloween franchise was not immune, and taking up the challenge was critically acclaimed director Rob Zombie.
If only Halloween had ever existed, the single film, it would seem kind of insane. But the way I looked at it was, there was the one classic film, and with each sequel, I felt like they ruined it more and more and more until it felt so far away from what I ever loved about it.
After 8 films spanning 4 decades, Zombie's challenge in 2007 was to find a new place to take the franchise. His destination? Inside the mind of the previously unknowable Michael Myers.
Why don't we just make the whole movie about him? The whole movie, he's our lead character, you know, he's not a secondary character. And that was really the approach I took.
Zombie's amped-up rendition of the Michael Myers legend received a cool response from critics.
As a movie on its own, it might have worked. When you're calling it Halloween, when you have a character named Michael Myers who's wearing that mask, it's a missed opportunity.
Zombie himself encountered a somewhat chilly reaction from Carpenter.
You know, I called him up, and the conversation pretty much went exactly like this. I was like, hey, John, it's Rob. Hey, just want to tell you I'm doing a remake of Halloween. And then there's like a weird silence that goes, so what do you want me to say? I go, I don't want you to say anything, I just wanted to tell you. He goes, okay, have fun with it. Okay.
Halloween is Halloween. Why would anybody want to touch that?
To be remade, to have a movie of mine remade is very flattering. And some of these remakes I get to collect a check, which is even nicer.
Rob Zombie's Halloween grossed over $80 million worldwide, possibly starting the cycle all over again. A sequel was released in 2009.
The fans found their ways to the sequels, they found their ways to other directors' movies which imitated this movie, and they're welcome to it. Just acknowledge this. John Carpenter's Halloween is the master of that kind of a genre.
His creators had known for some time that there was no stopping Michael Myers.
Was the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
And in recent years, the cast and crew of the original film have discovered that's truer than they ever imagined.
And you're Bill? I'm Bill.
There are conventions that are just dedicated to Halloween, where you can meet the actors from every single movie. You can debate the finer details of Michael Myers' very complicated, weird chronology and mythology.
And then people do things like build the Myers house.
But we replicated the railing here and the bottom down here. We got that exactly replicated like the original house. I have built a life-size replica of John Carpenter's Myers house from Halloween.
Wow, these people are really serious and they really, really love and adore this movie and this whole franchise.
As its creators have watched the phenomenon endure, they're only now beginning to understand the impact they made during those 21 days in the spring of 1978.
Deeply proud of it. I think it deserves all the praise.
It's really a small little film. It's like a work of art. It was just the magic of everyone coming together.
The fact that the interest in it has lasted this long, that's really sort of the magic of film in general, and the great satisfaction of being able to work on films like that for people like myself.
It was a movie that I made when I was 30 years old. So it's part of my past, it will always be there. I've made my peace with it, sure.
Forever I will be grateful to Halloween. I now never have to dress up on Halloween. I get to just go as me. I think it's an extraordinary movie, and it has given me my life.
I don't think you ought to question too much about the legacy of Halloween. It just is. Let it be. Don't question it. It might go away.